Hey everybody, this is Everyday Commentary. I'm going to do a video review of the Almar Hawk Ultralight. And this is the knife. This is the Almar Hawk Ultralight. And no, I did not clean it off. It was in my pocket today. So, this knife is a knife designed by Almar. It was originally a knife that had a nail neck, and you would open it that way. Later they added the thumb stud, and they made it a one-hand opening knife. The knife features the Almar front lock, which is a variant on the back lock. It has micarta handles, and it weighs less than 1 ounce. The knife's blade length is just over 2.5 inches, and closed, it's close to 3¼ inches, I think. Let me get my spec sheet out here. The spec sheet is really not the big deal. The big deal is the fact that the blade to handle ratio on this knife is crazy. The blade to handle ratio on this knife is higher than any knife I've ever reviewed. I've reviewed, close to 70 knives, 60 knives now. And the blade to weight ratio is crazy. And this knife weighs less than 1 ounce, and it has a blade that's like 2.56 inches. So the way I do this is I have 10 categories. A knife or a given item can get 0 points, 1 point, or 2 points. 0 points means it doesn't do that thing particularly well. 1 point means it does it okay, and 2 points means it does it great. And so the 10 categories for knives, the first category is design. And I reference this in the written review, but I'm just going to say it here. This is a design, this particular knife is a design that I think that it is something that is essentially timeless. I mean, you look at a knife like this knife, the Griptilian, and this is a knife that has, decent lines, but it definitely looks like something made in the 1990s and the early 2000s. Whereas the Almar knife, absent the thumb stud, it could be something that was made in the 30s or 40s, the 50s or 60s, the 70s or 80s. I mean, it has a very distinct appearance. It looks not dissimilar from the Case Sodbuster, except that it's a little thinner and a little square. It's not quite as round, and of course, it locks. I have found that this is one of the knives that constantly goes into my rotation. It's sort of like a palate cleansing knife between tests. If I'm testing a knife and I want to see how well it works as a pure pocket knife, I drop this knife in. And I'll talk about the pure pocket knife aspect in a minute and the fact that it doesn't have a pocket clip. But I really like the knife. I like the design. I like how simple it is. I like how elegant it looks. I like the fact that the blade shape is nice and clean. This knife is so light you can drop it in your pocket and literally forget about it, but it still has, a blade that lets you do things with it and a good amount of purchase. You can get, a decent 4-finger grip. Not the best. You definitely get 3 fingers. You can get 4 fingers on that if you try. So in terms of design, I gave it a 2 out of 2. In terms of fit and finish, and that's why I have this knife here. This is my Chris Reeve Sebenza 20, small Sebenza 21. And this is the Almar Ultralight. So take a look at this. You have to work really hard to see where the knife, blade, and the back spring lock into place. And that's just one of the examples. The polished pivot here. You can run your fingernail across it and it doesn't get caught. These polished rivets, they're the same thing. You can't even feel them if you do like the fingernail test. There is just nothing on this knife that wasn't superlative in its finish. The fit is immaculate. The thumb studs are really well done. The blade has a great shape to it, just enough belly. The ricasso is very nice. The grind is nice, and I'll get that in a minute. There is literally nothing on this knife that was done poorly. And even after a year of pretty heavy use, it still looks good. So in terms of fit and finish, I gave it a 2 out of 2. And one thing that I will note is that I think this knife is probably at least the equal of the Sebenza, maybe a little better. Sebenza is a great knife. It has a great fit and finish, but there are places where I think it could be done a little nicer. Like I get a little tiny amount of wiggle in the pivot. You can fix that, but I fixed it a couple times. I get nothing on this guy. Nothing. No movement, no sloshiness, no wiggle. In terms of grip, it's really surprising. There's no jimping on this knife, but the shape of the knife is really great. And if you're going to use this knife, you're not going to be chopping wood with it. It's probably an EDC knife or a gentleman's folder. And for that, it has pretty darn good grip. The fact you can get 4 good fingers on here is really impressive. And in the roll, I think it's worth a 2 out of 2. In terms of carry, this is a knife that is incredibly, incredibly thin. I mean, the Sebenza is a pretty thin knife, but in comparison to the Ultralight, the Sebenza looks like a fatty. You compare it to something like the mini grip, you see, like, and a mini grip is a notoriously chubby knife for what it is. This knife is probably 1/3 the size of the mini grip, 1/4 the size. So in terms of carry, you have the really thin, sleek profile, and you have the lightweight, so I gave it a 2 out of 2. I would note that there is a potential for something to get hitched here on this exposed real tang. I've never had it happen. I've carried it for a year, so I'm not too worried about it, but I guess in theory, just bend my carded tip up a little bit, it'd be a lot better. And the steel is Aussate, and normally I don't like Aussate steel, and I think it's probably like on par. But this Aussate was so immaculately finished, and the blade geometry and the grind work on this knife so well, I really can't say anything bad about it. I mean, I've used it and used it and used it, and it's still sharp. This is a knife that just came incredibly sharp, in part because of the fit and finish. And it just cuts well. And in the end, that's why you have a knife. And so for that reason, I gave the Aussate on this particular knife, and not Aussate in general, but Aussate on this particular knife, a 2 out of 2. I think that if you look at it on other knives, if you look at it like on a cold steel knife, I'm not there. But with this, it's just really good. In terms of deployment, I really like the thumb studs. I don't normally like thumb studs, but these work well. They grab your thumb. They allow for a nice, smooth, easy deployment. It's not fast, but lockbacks generally aren't fast. And so for that, I gave it a 2 out of 2. In terms of retention, this knife does not have a pocket clip. It's not so small that it couldn't have a pocket clip. I kind of want it to have a pocket clip, but it doesn't. And so without a pocket clip and just the lanyard hole, I'm going to give it a 0 out of 2. I kind of hate lanyards. So that would be my biggest beef with this knife. Finally, in terms of the lock or the blade safety on this knife, the lock back snaps into place. It's really stable. It's easy to deploy, engage, and easy to disengage. And in theory, you can work this knife one-handed. I don't ever do that because I'm not using this knife to cut stuff up or in a high pressure situation, but this is a really great knife. I really like the knife. I think that it does everything that you need a knife to do really well in terms of an EDC knife. I think it's elegant enough that it could be a gentleman's knife. It's not terribly expensive. I like it a lot. So just to go back and talk a little bit more about the blade, in terms of grind, I gave it a 2 out of 2. I mean, the grind on this knife is immaculate. The main cutting edge is perfectly wide enough to get some purchase on. And then the full flat grind just gives you so much cutting power. I really, really like that. And the blade shape, I gave it 2 out of 2 on grind, and the blade shape is the same thing. It's a simple, elegant blade shape. Good, a little bit of belly, nice slicing. You can choke up on stuff. You can dig out splinters. I actually used it to dig out part of a splinter. So I gave it a 2 out of 2 in terms of its blade shape. So if you total all of that up, this is an 18 out of 20. And it's an 18 out of 20 because they didn't put a pocket clip on it. But if you don't need a pocket clip, I think this is one of the best knives out there for the money. I paid $110 for it. You can probably find it for $90 online. It's a great knife. It really does work well. It's light. If it's hot out and you don't want to carry around something that makes you sweaty, drop this in your pocket. I found that it carries especially well with this little Steve Koo DD. It's a great combination of EDC. And I think it weighs well less than 2 ounces. I think it weighs like 1.5 ounces. This is 0.96, and I think this is 0.6. So you put those two together, and you got a good EDC pair for less than 2 ounces. That's it.